There is a quiet change that happens in many women after 30, and it rarely announces itself loudly. It doesn't come as a breakdown or a dramatic decision. It arrives softly, almost invisibly. One day you realize that being alone no longer feels uncomfortable. In fact, it feels accurate. The silence doesn't scare you, it steadies you. And what once felt like loneliness now feels like space. Space where you can finally hear yourself think, feel, and exist without interruption. This shift often confuses people around you, but inside it feels strangely right. For much of early adulthood, your psychological energy is pulled outward. Your sense of self is shaped through interaction, through being seen, chosen, desired, needed. The subconscious learns that connection equals safety, that being emotionally available is how belonging is secured. You adapt. You soften parts of yourself. You learn to read rooms, anticipate needs, manage reactions. None of this is conscious, it's emotional survival. But over time, your inner world starts to notice patterns that your conscious mind may have ignored. You notice how often you give more than you receive. How often you explain yourself just to be understood halfway. How often connection costs you a quiet sense of self. As you move into your 30s, the psyche begins to reorganize. The ego grows tired of constant adjustment. Not angry, just fatigued. You become more aware of what drains you, not because you're analyzing it, but because your body reacts faster than your thoughts. Certain conversations leave you tense. Certain relationships leave you restless. And without making a dramatic choice, you begin to pull your energy back. Solitude doesn't feel like retreat. It feels like relief. There is also something deeper unfolding beneath this preference for being alone. Solitude brings you face to face with parts of yourself that were once easier to avoid. The unexpressed disappointment, the quiet resentment, the grief you never fully named because life kept moving. Earlier, distraction helped keep these emotions contained. Noise softened their edges. But as you mature, the mind grows less tolerant of suppression. The shadow doesn't force itself forward. It waits patiently until you are still enough to notice it. Solitude becomes the only place where you don't have to be pleasant, agreeable, or emotionally useful. It's where you're allowed to be unfinished. In being alone, you no longer have to perform coherence. You don't have to make sense to anyone. Your contradictions are allowed to exist without explanation. This is not isolation, it's psychological honesty. And once the nervous system experiences that kind of safety, it remembers it. It begins to crave environments that don't require self-betrayal, even in subtle forms. Around this time, many women experience a quiet philosophical shift, a questioning that doesn't demand answers, only awareness. Who am I when I'm not being perceived? When I'm not reacting to someone else's expectations or interpretations? Solitude strips away roles. It removes the mirrors that once defined you. And without those reflections, the ego feels less solid at first. There's a moment of uncertainty. But within that uncertainty is freedom. You stop existing as a response. You begin existing as a presence. Silence sharpens emotional perception. In solitude, you notice how your body reacts to certain memories, certain names, certain possibilities. You notice the tension that appears when you imagine overextending yourself again. You notice the calm that arrives when nothing is required of you. This is emotional intelligence forming quietly, not through advice or effort, but through attention. You don't try to become more self-aware. You simply stop drowning out what's already there. What changes after 30 is not your desire for connection, but your tolerance for distortion. You no longer want closeness that requires you to shrink. You're less willing to be misunderstood just to keep peace. Solitude becomes a filter, not a wall, but a threshold. Only what feels real is allowed near. And because depth is rare, being alone becomes more common, not as punishment, but as preference. There's also a deeper understanding of meaning that begins to emerge. Meaning no longer feels like something you chase through milestones or validation. It starts to feel like coherence. When your inner life aligns with your outer choices, solitude helps you sense where that alignment exists and where it doesn't. It doesn't tell you what to do. It simply removes distractions so you can feel what's already true. At some point, you stop seeing solitude as temporary, not something to endure until life becomes fuller. You recognize it as a relationship in itself, one that asks nothing and reveals everything. This doesn't make you distant or cold. It makes you precise. You don't disappear from the world. You condense into yourself. So if you notice that quiet has become valuable to you, if being alone feels grounding rather than empty, nothing has gone wrong. Something has matured. And perhaps the real question is no longer why you prefer solitude now, but who you are becoming when you finally give yourself the space to listen.